Is this working? We're good. Okay, so my name is Mark Schneider. I am a non-resident senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. A lot of words. And I'm the host for this event. Matt Sigelman, will you introduce yourself?
And I'm president of the Burning Glass Institute.
Okay, we don't need...
Few words.
Few words. I had more words, but I had a longer title. And one of the things I know is that the more words in your title, the lower down you are, right? President, one word, right? Vice president, 2 words. And then all of a sudden, like, psh. Okay, so I'm just gonna, we're gonna set the table, as they say, my job, and then I'm gonna ask Matt some questions. We'll go through maybe 20 minutes. The last few minutes is going to be a demonstration of a really interesting, exciting website that Burning Glass is going to release on the 16th of this month. There's also going to be a report that will come out on the 16th of this month. So let me start with which I believe everybody agrees with now, that like higher education is losing a lot of credibility. A lot of people are very suspicious of higher education. The higher education institutions of higher education, IHEs, are in trouble for many, many, many reasons. And part of the reason is that there's increasing questioning about the degree to which degrees pay off, right? So we know from a lot of work, some of which I did, some of it I did with Matt, Preston Cooper, who's also at AI, have demonstrated negative ROI for incredible numbers of programs at the bachelor's and master's programs. If you push the right button, I could give you my whole spiel about master's programs, but we could do that at the end of this. So, given this frustration, right, what is one of the things that people are looking at are short-term credentials, right? And these come in many, many flavors. Matt and I, when I was running an organization called College Measures 10 years ago, Matt and I were doing work with states using UI wage data. And I must admit, the ROI for, when we started documenting the ROI for certificate programs, again, these are programs, not non-credential, non-credit credentials, which we'll talk about in a minute. The ROI for these technical degrees being granted by community colleges was amazingly high, and much higher, for example, than most bachelor's and even most master's degrees. And when we first started uncovering that, I looked at the data, I looked at the data, I looked at the data. There has to be a mistake because I used to be a university faculty member. I believed in the value of degrees and credentials, and all of a sudden, these technical certificates just swamped the ROI for bachelor's and master's degrees. So that was a beginning. I'm going to take some credit for that because we started documenting that 10 years ago, more now, and people like, oh my God, is this true? And the answer is yes, it's true. And now that impetus is expanded to do things like to encompass workforce Pell. So whether or not we're going to get workforce Pell, Matt and I were just talking about this earlier, but this has been a perennial topic. Like we need short-term Pell, right? Now called workforce Pell. We have an EO on apprenticeships. So people are becoming more and more interested in apprenticeships. Also, ways of getting people into the job market that are faster and cheaper than traditional. And then, I don't know, who knows what's going to happen with, like, we're going to take $3 billion from Harvard and give it to technical training programs. But all of this is part of a piece that's saying there's a change in the atmosphere, there's a change in expectations about the value of higher education credentials. But workforce Pell, the $3 billion from Harvard, these are all like rounding error compared to what is actually going on out in the field, where there are literally 1.2 million non-credit credentials that are out in the world. On June 16th, we're going to release a paper and this website that's going to help people understand and investigate the ROI actually, I'm going to qualify that because we're not doing ROI because most of these cost data is not available. And Matt will talk about this in a minute. It's like, if there's no R, then why do ROI? You don't need the I if the returns are negative. So we're going to talk a few minutes about the work that we're doing on non-credit credentials. We'll talk for 10 minutes, 15 minutes. I have some questions to set this up, and then we'll move on to the demo, and then Matt and I will join you all, and there's a panel that will be talking about the on-the-ground experience of different kinds of organizations, different organizations with regard to ROI. So just a quick overview. So Matt, how many credentials, I stepped on your line. I said 1.2, but anyway, but how many credentials are out there? And what are the dimensions that you are thinking about and that we need to think about when we start looking at these, I won't give the number again, so I'll leave that to you. But I mean, what are the dimensions that we need to firmly evaluate the value of these credentials?
So there are, yes, something in the neighborhood of 1.2 million credentials. It may be 1.1, but who's counting? Just by the way, since we are counting apparently, I always have to point out that there are 171,000 headwords in the Oxford English Dictionary. So when we talk about 1.1 or 1.2 million non-degree credentials, it means they dwarf the number of words in the English language. So what really that says is there's a Wild West, and we're leaving learners, workers, but also the people who invest in these credentials, the schools that offer them, very little guidance as to which ones work. So the idea behind this work that we've undertaken together was to actually track this empirically. This is the kind of stuff that, to Mark's point, previously was very hard, if not impossible to do, because how are you going to even track that many credentials across all the people who earn them? You can't design a survey that big. The good news is that data methods have evolved in pretty dramatic ways. So we can now study empirically what happens in people's careers at scale. One of the things we've done at the Burning Glass Institute is we've built a database of the career histories of 65 million US workers. That's about 40% of the US workforce. And so what we can actually do, and we've done in this work, is said, okay, when somebody earns a given credential, what happens to them? Now, the reality of that 1.1 million, there it is again, is that the vast majority of them you'll almost never see. So what we did is we focused on the 23,000 of them that actually appear in people's career histories with a good deal of regularity. That's still a lot. So this represents, just to put that in perspective, this represents every certification of any currency in America, and then another 20,000 credentials. And what we've then done is said, okay, to figure out which ones work, we try to really distill down. We started out with 42 measures, which is, I want to point out, more than Baskin-Robbins. And we distilled it down to a 4-part nutrition label. So this is number one, did the credential, to what extent did this improve people's chances of landing in the job that it was targeting? Number two, did it help people move up within their field? Number three, are they earning more than people like them who didn't get that? And number four, is it giving them a leg up in terms of having differentiating skills? That's it, right? So we could have put 42 measures. We said, look, what's the things that need to be on that nutrition label that everyone can understand? Did it help me get into the job? Did it help me move up within my job? Did it help me earn more? And we evaluated that empirically across all 23,000 of these credentials. And the glass is either 87% empty or it's 13% full. We found that only about 13% of them actually move you up in terms of your wages. That sounds like 87% empty. But actually, I want to make a case for the 13% full. Because, as I said before, 23,000 non-degree credentials is a lot. And so this says that there's actually, of the ones we measured, almost 3,000 of them, which give people a significant R, if not an ROI. And that's a pretty important finding, because it says that, not that there's no hope of helping people invest in non-degree credentials, but we have to give a framework for helping people figure out which ones.
So it's not only the framework. So probably 4 items on the nutrition level label is more than Baskin Robbins has, by the way. But we'll leave that for a different discussion. So the question for me is, okay, so you're pioneering this work. We've been 10, 15 years at least. You've been pushing on this, but how do we make this elevate this? Right? What's the role of the states, for example? We're going to talk about this in a bit. We have Amy Gadara here from Virginia. She could talk about that. We could talk about providers, like what's the responsibility of firms to provide this information? How do we elevate this discussion? How do we make this possible for more people to understand and access these data?
So I think what we've done together thus far is a starting point, which is to say we've created an evidence base. But the real question, to your point, is how does this get used? I'm focused on moving this to pilot a few specific kind of use cases. Number one, I want to make sure that we are, of course, helping learners and workers figure out what should I earn. Second, I want training providers themselves, colleges and universities, CTE programs, to be able to say, what should we offer? I want policy makers to be able to have a better understanding of what we should fund, and employers to be able to say what should we honor.
So, so it's a aggressive agenda to get many people using this, to say the least.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, but it gets you up in the morning. So this is actually very important. Okay, so in my mind, there's always been a balance that we have to strike between regulation, which is a government function, and consumer information, which governments could assist on. But there's a lot more ways of thinking about getting consumer information into the hands of people. So, I mean, this is oversimplified, but where do you fall on, we need regulation, or we need to do the kind of work that you've been doing, that I've been doing, getting this information out into the world to help consumers make their appropriate choices?
So I think this is somewhere in between. I don't know that this is something where we need to regulate away credentials that, by whatever standard, aren't delivering people to what we would consider effective outcomes. I would like to believe that that two things will do that for us. Number one, I agree with you that that we do need to empower consumers. Look, nutrition labels, the real ones, have been very empowering for consumers. You can still buy Twinkies, but you can't claim that they're good for you. So that kind of information has been very important. The work that you've done on the college scorecard has been very important. But we also recognize that it's probably not sufficient. The public right now is, in many cases, funding some of these in the sense that whether it's Perkins Act dollars and CTE programs, whether it's WIOA dollars, whether it's just public higher education systems that are offering programs that have no merit. We need to make sure that we're creating not necessarily a regulation, but a set of standards. What are the kinds of things that programs should have to report back, should have to measure, and how do we define a set of standards for what we're going to invest in as a public? And I think if we bring together that notion of having clear standards with clear public reporting, I think we can really move the needle on focusing in on the programs that work and getting more of the programs that don't to deliver better outcomes.
So I will admit that the work I did at College Measures, which was designing consumer sites that had ROI information, was the hardest thing I ever done in my entire life. It was, going out, it was like retail politics. It was unbelievably difficult. And when you had successes, it was beautiful. I mean, you felt so good, but it was a very, very hard lift. So we're going to do a 2 to 3 minute demo of the website. I mentioned there's a website coming up on the 16th. There's going to be a report released on the 16th. And so let's just spend a couple of minutes so you can start demoing it.
Mark's comment, by the way, on how hard this is his way of saying, you guys be the judge. We did wind up actually speaking with a lot of people we would want to use this, and that's part of how we kind of reduce things down. But I'm just going to take you through a very short tour here, and again, on the 16th, this will be public, and hope you'll take the time to engage with this. This is what we call the Credential Value Index. Again, it's this empirical result. And you could literally type anything in the search bar. It could be a skill, it could be a specific program or provider. Why don't we just type Google Ads in there? This is a common thing that people want certification in. So go ahead and search. What you're going to see in a second is a set of, first of all, a range. So just even among the top 20 results, you can see this is looking at by wage gain at the top bar here. You can see on the right, you're seeing Udemy's Google AdWords Essential Training, which gives you a pretty quick $6,700 wage gain. That's quite significant. More on that in a second. All the way to the left, Google's own AdWords training, which only sees you bump up by about $300. You can also look at this, by the way, the gray bar, just broad categories. So you can see that, for example, in general, Google Ads certifications deliver $3,100, whereas if you go one click over from that, marketing credentials are overall a little bit less effective in moving people up, but still quite positive. Let's go and sort this, though, by the ability to start a new job. So let's click on that new job filter on the left. And let's collapse the panel. I just want to focus on this nutrition label for a second. So if we just stop here for a second and go to the top. So what you're seeing here is, again, those 4 panels in the nutrition label that we talked about before. Here we're sorting it by how many people are actually able to switch, how much more likely than other people who started out like you to switch into this field. So we're seeing this Google's own ads display thing, which gives an $8,100 bump, gives you a 31-point increase in your ability to move into the field that you were targeting. So that's again, relative to other people who might have been trying to do this, but without this credential. We could sort, but we also, by the way, if we unpack this, we give you a lot of other information. We wanted to distill those 42 measures, but you could see here's the jobs that people who get this credential wind up going into. Here's the skills. Here's where they go off and work. But also importantly, is this actually an alternative to a BA? Or is this something that works on top of a degree? In this case, it's something that works. Most of the people who are getting the value out of this already have a BA, right? So this is not the great, we can now enable skills-based hiring. People won't need a college degree. You actually need a college degree and is how this value works. Just to go to the top very briefly, and I'm keen to get to the panel, we could sort this by how much this moves your career advancement. So how much this moves you up within fields. If we click on career advancement there. Here, the best ones are give you a 12-point advantage relative to your peers in getting a promotion. Or we could sort by wage gain and see, okay, what are the most effective credentials, from $8,100 down to a whole bunch that give you nothing. I'll do one last thing. One of the things that's fascinating in our findings is that even within high reputation providers, we saw a lot of variance. So let's click on the providers filter here. And let's say we're just going to look at one provider. Let's click on Udemy. And what you'll see here is 3 Udemy credentials in this area. Their Google AdWords certification gives you a $6,700 wage gain. Their advanced content training gives you $600. And their actual Google Analytics course, I think if we scroll down to the bottom, gives you no wage gain at all. Right? So this is the kind of transparency we believe people need and policymakers need in order to be able to get to greater efficacy in how we use non-degree credentials.
So I think this is giving you a taste of 2 things. One, that there is a wild, wild west out there with lots of credentials, right? And there's very few rules or guidance that is generally applicable. So the same provider, a high status provider, could turn out credentials that have no return or can turn out credentials with very high return. So knowing that, oh, Stanford gave out these credentials, is no guarantee that the credential works. And then there are 1.1 something million credentials out there, and the amount of information out there to figure out which ones I should invest in as a parent, as a worker, as a student, it's just not there yet. So this is, for me, this is like an incredible way of cutting through an enormous amount of very confusing, very not crystal clear information. And the last thing, I mean, I have 2 daughters, I have a bunch of grandkids. I think I count 4. Anyway, but it's like, I don't want them wasting their time. I don't want them wasting their money. The kids need to have good advice about, like, if you do this, you're likely, because all these kids, I mean, they want big houses and fast cars, right? And they like, that's what I want. Well, we have to start helping them at least understand that they're not going to get that, or it's going to take them a long time to get it. But if you do this, the chances of having what you want is higher than if you do that. And I think that's our responsibility. I think it's the responsibility of government. I think that's the responsibility of researchers. I think that's the responsibility of private corporations. And I think the work that, and again, I've been working with Matt on and off for a dozen years. I think the work that they're doing and this roadmap to effective and credentials that work, I think is incredibly important. So we're going to stop right, Matt and I are going to step off the stage. We have an important panel representing different viewpoints and different perspectives on how to get this information developed better and into the hands of other folk. Oh, wait a second, sorry.
I think we're back up and live. Good afternoon. I'm Debbie Wasden. I'm Senior Vice President at the Burning Glass Institute, and I get to lead this esteemed panel today. Just reflecting on the research and the demo and the potential that Matt and Mark just talked about. We wanted to bring a panel of experts to here today because, as you heard, we've focused a lot on what exists in that Wild West. Just the ability to catalog credentials has been almost a heroic effort. But the idea that you can actually have outcome measures and the data to inform people to allow them to make a decision that's right for them is really something that is exciting and groundbreaking and something that we're really eager to get into the hands of people. And yet, as the discussion sort of alluded to, it's not obvious, just you throw something over the transom and people just know what to do with it. And so for this panel today, we really wanted to focus on the value, the use, the implications of where we're headed with credentials of value and the data that we hope will become invaluable for the different stakeholders that you each represent. I'm joined today by Marcus Felder, who's a managing director at Blackstone. Jason Tishko, who's senior vice president at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation and secretary of education for the Commonwealth of Virginia, Amy Gadara. I'd love to just turn to each of the panelists, maybe starting with you, Amy, to ask each of you to just introduce yourselves and share a bit about how you're thinking about credentials and what this new data might unlock.
Great. Thank you for having me here today. And Mark, as you were talking, I was remembering about geeking out over college measures, over muffins in Georgetown, and thinking, what if, and we're now here, so it's great. So thank you for your leadership, and Matt, for you as well. So I do a lot of thinking these days about what the purpose of education is, and especially the purpose of public education. And there are three things in my mind. One is, the most important thing is to prepare people for success in life and to be ready for life. And I think that there are three pieces of that preparation for life. The first one is to ensure that our graduates of schools in Virginia, at whatever point, from high school, 2-year, 4-year workforce development programs, is that they are prepared to be productive and active members of our economy. Second of all, to be informed, engaged citizens in our democracy. And third of all, to be engaged and good, responsible neighbors in our communities. And to me, this conversation is about that first piece of how do we prepare every single Virginian to be prepared to be successful and to add value in our economy. And the credential piece is so critical in the short-term credential for all the reasons that Mark and Matt talked about. And we're really proud in Virginia for what we've done. We're seen as being a leader in the short-term credential work, especially around our work around what we colloquially call Fast Forward, which is aptly named, and the more formal term is the Workforce Credential Grant Program. And it embodies the best of so many things that work. One, it's a pay-for-performance program. Two, it is about making sure that we don't put public dollars into the junk that you just heard these two gentlemen talk about. I see one of my roles as a government person up here is to be a good steward of the taxpayers' money in Virginia. And pertaining to this conversation, that means how do we make sure that we incentivize the best investments that do have this return on investment, and how do we make sure that we don't waste people's time, energy, and money, their own money, as well as the people of Virginia's money, and instead incentivize people through good information, but also through the incentives to pursue training and education that's actually going to result in them having an increase in production, of an increase in their wages and their socioeconomic mobility. So I'm going to give you just a quick overview, and I encourage you to look more about this. Workforce Credential Grant Program. It is a third paid for by the student and by the state and the institution of higher education, and the results are incredible. It is set up that only supports credentials that are fueling our most high in demand, high value jobs in Virginia. So we're basically saying we're not paying for everything, we're only paying for what matters, which is why the website you just saw and something I'm going to tell you about that we're doing in Virginia matters, so that people have access to good information. But also it's now in statute that those high demand jobs will be determined by our Virginia Office of Education Economics, which produces regional labor market information to say what are those top jobs, those top high value jobs. The second piece is that you pay if you get paid more if you actually earn a credential. And what we know from this study and doing results, and this data is about a year old, we know that 100%, 99.9% of people who sign up for this program complete the training. We know that 80% actually earn the credential. And we know of those populations that finish the training, their salaries go up an average of 16%. And for people who earn a credential at the end of this training, the salaries go up 23%. So that's a huge difference. And to me, one of the most interesting statistics in this research is that 2/3 of the people who take advantage of this program have never, ever touched any workforce program or form of education after high school. So we're tapping into an entirely different group of people, and that we are having measurable impact on results in terms of their wages and opening doors to opportunity. Why the work that you just saw that Matt just showed matters, and what we're doing in Virginia in terms of really scraping that job market information and getting it out to people is twofold. One, you have to determine what is actually a high demand, high value job, and you need to do the research to determine which credentials are aligned to that. We're able to do that now in Virginia at the local level, at the regional level, so we can provide people actionable information. That's good for opportunity seekers, but it's also essential for our programs, because we're now talking and working with our community colleges, our higher education centers, to have them look at that data and realize, stop doing the things that aren't producing any returns on investment for people. So this is as much about stopping to do things that are wasting time, energy, and money, both public and private, as much as it is encouraging to start new things and being responsive to the market. Happy to talk more about that, but we are in huge, huge alignment that this is about transparency, and this is also about creating incentives for people to take those pathways that take you to something that's going to open more doors to opportunity in the future.
What an opening. Jason?
Hello, everyone. Jason Tishko with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and its foundation. Actually, I work for both organizations. On the U.S. Chamber side, it's the world's largest business federation. I work on education and workforce policy, and then on the foundation side of the house, I oversee our workforce programming. That's our nonprofit affiliate. And in the work that we do at the Chamber and Chamber Foundation, I like to think of this as threefold. I'll follow the rule of three. So the first is, at the point of hire. So as an employer is posting a job ad, they're wanting to vet a pool of candidates for that position. Folks are showing up with credentials that are very difficult to unpack. So if we want employers to make good decisions about who's qualified for the opportunity and to invite them into that opportunity, they need to make sure that the data and the technology they're using could really unpack and accurately assess the capabilities, the skills, the experience an individual has, and how it relates to that job. And for a lot of firms, particularly large firms, but also medium-sized firms, they're relying on technology to do a lot of this vetting for them. So the people aren't even involved yet. So the machines really need to unpack this data, and we need more transparency around what's inside the credential and what it represents. And if somebody's going to be investing significant time, significant resources, potentially taxpayer-backed resources, we want to make sure that when they are pursuing opportunity in the economy, that they are fully represented. So we need to make sure that we are creating more transparency around these credentials, because that's going to be the gateway to getting those jobs and advancing in their career. So that's where employers could really use some assistance, is getting more transparency around, give me the sum total of this individual's experiences and capabilities, and the credential is either going to be transparent or it's going to be a black box, and we're not sure what to do with that. The second point is talent pipeline development. So on the foundation side, we support a national network of organizations that are building and operating talent supply chains. And we have businesses that are putting in the time to actually organize a set of partners that are developing a pathway that leads to them. They're the employer of choice in that talent supply chain. And as part of that, we ask them to evaluate the hiring requirements for the position, do the job analysis, revisit it, remove degree and other credential requirements as needed, move to more skill-based approaches as appropriate, but then clearly articulate to those preferred providers of talent what those requirements are going to be, so when someone does show up, they're not just one of a dozen, one of hundreds, one of thousands showing up for the opportunity, but they are able to quickly and efficiently and affordably acquire the minimum viable credentials needed to access that opportunity. So that's where employers could also be useful. It's not just unpacking the credential when at the point of hire, but being able to develop a talent pipeline on which their competitiveness is now going to depend, and be very clear on how credentials are going to be a part of that pipeline is going to be really important. I think tools like this can help. And in fact, as Mark was commenting, I was remembering some of the earlier work that you did that I think was very eye-opening. It's not just what you get, it's where you get it, right? And I loved how Matt had showed that in the demonstration of like, hey, we can pick the provider. That's really important, and that speaks to our audience, because preferred providers matter. So it's not just what's inside the credential, but where'd you get it. That's real actionable intelligence employers could use to build high-performing talent supply chains. And then the third point I wanted to make is around upskilling and reskilling. Now, we had mentioned that taxpayers are backing a lot of these resources, but in the future, we think employers are going to be playing a more prominent role. They're already heavy investors in this space, and if you were just to look at Section 127 of the tax code today, which governs employee education benefits, that leverages about $30 billion in private sector contributions every year. Well, we have some new ideas that we're going to be advancing. One such idea is called skill savings accounts, which would essentially create the equivalent of a HSA or an FSA for skills. So now it's not about reimbursing $5,250 in tuition 6 months later, but if I could give you $500 right now in a debit-style account to dynamically pursue upskilling and reskilling, we want to create that kind of relationship between the employer and the employee. So imagine, if you will, a future where we have a third of the workforce, approximately 60 million plus workers, opening one of these accounts, and employers putting in the first $1,000 to $2,000 in them. that would create a $100 billion upskilling and reskilling marketplace, where now you have incumbent workers going out to upskill on demand. Well, having a resource like Credentials of Value is going to be very important to enable that marketplace to take effective action. So if folks do have resources and have limited time and money to pursue upskilling and reskilling to advance their career, resources like this can provide them actionable intelligence to make smart, quick decisions, so they're getting the most out of that employer investment, and they're getting the most out of the time they're investing in it. So we think efforts like this are really important. Technology is going to play more and more of an outside role in providing navigation and guidance services. So it's a heck of a start. I applaud Burning Glass Institute for what you've all done. And I think it's only going to get better over time. So that's just 3 different ways the business community is thinking about this.
Fantastic. And Marcus?
Hi, everybody. Marcus Felder, not Marcus Blackstone, but Marcus Felder.
My
No, all
apologies.
good, Debbie. All good. All good. As Debbie mentioned, I'm managing director at Blackstone. I always like to share, though, that my background getting to Blackstone is a little windy in that I was a government employee. So I worked for the New York City Department of Transportation. I worked for the state agency at CUNY, City University of New York. I worked for a nonprofit organization that focused on college access. And then was recruited to Blackstone. There was this job that opened up that was working with the portfolio companies, and Blackstone has approximately 230 portfolio companies. If you add all the employees up, there's about 700,000 employees, so a pretty large employer. If you listed us on the large employers, it'd be number probably like 3 or 4. This job to help them think differently about talent. It piqued my interest. I ended up applying, getting the job, and really what it was it's a new way for us to work with our companies to add value through talent. So the program's called Career Pathways. I was recruited to Blackstone to build and lead, and there are 2 main aims, so not 3, sorry, but 2 main aims of Career Pathways. One is how do we constructively disrupt the hiring ecosystems across our portfolio companies. Thinking about the companies that had gone back to the same places time and time again, they may have had success, but thinking about different ways to tap into talent pools, whether it's people without 4-year college degrees, people with disabilities, refugees, veterans, the list of kind of untapped talent communities to help them reach their business needs or hiring needs, to help them unlock new markets. Really thinking about grounding it in the business case was important for us. The second aim was thinking more broadly around what are their talent practices that they have in place and how can we help them advance those talent practices. My executive sponsor is our global head of private equity, Joe Barada. And my role, I remember when I was interviewing, he was my last interview, and I wondered, why does this person want to meet with me? He is like the number 3 person at the firm. I don't know. I have no idea where this role will sit, but it was going to sit within his operation, within private equity. We were formerly called Portfolio Operations. We're now called the Operating Team, but we are the group that realizes the value creation plan that the deal teams have set out. So I'm on the talent team, and for us, we look at talent from the CXO space. So my manager looks at CEOs, CFOs, CHROs, those C-suite executives. I'm looking at entry-level middle skills roles, mid-level roles, and really thinking about how to get those folks in, but working with those companies around what are some of the things that you're doing that that have been built up over time that are keeping people out, that are keeping people from moving around your organization, keeping people from moving up within your organization. So for us, it's coming in and working with the companies to help them mature on some of those practices, whether it's around recruiting and hiring, but also and especially around retention, development, and advancement. A big piece of this, my executive sponsor, again, sits on the board of Year Up United, a national nonprofit organization that works with a lot of people who don't have college degrees, 4-year college degrees. They're often 2-year college degree holders, or they have certifications or other training. And the idea of the program came about because the founder came to Joe and said, hey, we have all these amazing young people, 18 to 26 years old, 18 to 24, who have gone through our training program. You have all these portfolio companies. How do we bring the 2 together? Again, to solve a business need. And so that's where the idea around embedding skills-based approaches into career pathways came about. So how do we work with our companies to think about removing degree requirements from select roles? How do we help them think through what their hiring process looks like so that they have the widest pool possible? They're selecting candidates that meet the skills that they need for those critical roles that they have open? How do they help them work once they've been hired? Think about their ongoing development. What are some of the ways that you're continuing to think about skills to not only move up, but also laterally within your organization, rotational programs? How do we help them think about launching apprenticeship programs, registering those apprenticeship programs? How do we think about introducing talent providers? So we have cultivated a network of talent providers beyond Europe United, about 20 to 30 different organizations, mostly here in the US, but also in Europe, to really help them think about not just that recruitment, but also, as Jason mentioned, the upskilling that can happen with your existing workforce, because we're also responding to the different needs. I'm working with companies from all different industries, all different sizes, small and medium sized mostly, but some larger companies as well that have different needs. So for us, we come in as consultants, advisors, intermediaries between kind of the talent supply and talent demand, and really help companies advance in their practices. So this credential piece is a big piece of how we think about introducing those new sources of talent, but also then, as I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit more, how do we validate that? How do our employers validate that? How do they verify that you actually have those skills that you say that you do coming into the role, that it's a good match with the roles that are needed to be filled? So it's been really great to be able to hear the advancements that's been happening, especially around transparency and accountability.
Thank you each for that tremendous overview, and we'll come back to those smaller and mid-sized companies and employers in a few minutes. Starting maybe, Amy, with you, I'd love us to dive a little bit deeper into some of the big policy programs that we've heard. There's been a lot of discussion about new forms of workforce Pell. You heard Jason put out skill savings accounts, those kind of things, and ensuring that taxpayer dollars are invested effectively towards quality education. How are you thinking about this in the context of Virginia and maybe even more broadly, more nationally?
Sure. I guess the context I'd put to that question is, for the last 10, 15, 20 years, there's been this whole message of everybody needs to go to college. And I don't think it was meant to say everyone needs to go to four-year college, but that's what people heard, is that everybody needs to go to four-year college. And I want to give you a couple data points. One, I can't give you all the data points that Mark has written about in terms of people being over-skilled, over-educated, and doing that. He talked about that. But I'll give you a Virginia data that, to me, keeps me up at night and says, this isn't working. And it's the data point that 10% of our first-year students in our four-year colleges, we have 15 in Virginia, don't persist into a second year of school. And of that 10%, 40% of those students drop out with a debt load of $10,000 or more. And there are lots of reasons why that could happen. One, the K-12 system, for which I'm also responsible, is not doing its job, right? So we're not preparing students to be ready to do college level work. But I also think it's because we have pushed so many people to go in and that we've incentivized everyone going to college, and that a lot of people, that's not what they want to do. They get there, they're not ready, but they're also not fulfilled, and they don't know what they're doing there. And so to me, these are the moments about why we're having this conversation, and this talk about short-term credentials, short-term Pell is such the rage, is people realize this is not working, and we've got data to prove it. And so part of what we've also been doing, and then the third piece on that, just to keep the rule of three going, is, and then you can go back to two, and then is the third piece is we have told people that there is one way to success that's more dignified and has more dignity and is better than others, and I just think that's wrong, right? That my job in education and why I work in education is about opening doors to opportunity, and that's going to look different for everybody, and we need to personalize education and allow everyone to dream and make sure everybody has the information and understands the pathways to fulfill their dreams. But that does not mean that everybody needs to take the same pathway. But it really matters that it's not tracking, it's not telling certain people that here's your pathway and certain people over here, here's your pathway. It's making sure that everybody understands what are the jobs out there, what are the pathways to get there, and how do you pay for it. And so that is fueling everything that we're doing in Virginia. And starting in our K-12 system. So we have just put in place through our State Board of Education a new accountability system, which we're calling a school performance and support framework. And it is based on the whole belief that you should graduate ready for life. And so a couple of those areas are graduating from elementary school with your foundational skills that you can be doing advanced work in middle school. Middle school now, and every eighth grader in Virginia will now create a true academic and career plan that starts by going to our Virginia Office of Education Economics website and looking up what are the top jobs, the most high-value jobs in our region and in the state, what's of interest to me, and then how do I actually create the pathway, and then there's more than one pathway to get there. And then also we're retraining all of our guidance counselors to then talk about, and what's the financial aid? And how do we make it possible for every single student in eighth grade and family of a student in eighth grade to understand the multiple pathways to make any dream possible and to understand the realities of decisions that you make and how you plan your years. In high school, baked into the accountability system, is that now we've built that incentive thing I talked about before of greater transparency, but also incentivizing people to do the right thing, to open doors. So not only that students and families have incentives to pursue and master credentials, but now every school and every school division will get more credit for the number of students that graduate with either or and college credit and an associate's degree, military readiness as measured by the ASVAB, and third of all, industry-recognized credentials for high demand, high value jobs. So we're not saying just anything. And I want to underscore a couple things. It's not having exposure to careers. It's not having exposure to ideas. It's actually proving that you're proficient and you have earned a credential and or college credit. And what's also very important is that those things are weighted the same. And they're weighted the same because what we're saying is that there's value and dignity in all of those pathways to get to your definition of success and what you want to do. And it's helping to understand the pathways that go and how you can build and stack those within Virginia. So that, to us, is what we're doing in terms of policy. We are ensuring that there is greater transparency that everyone can access about what those pathways are, whether you're 16 or 66. We're making sure that there is access to be able to, everyone can access them in a financial way, that you know the rules of how they can do that. And three, we're making sure that we are not wasting time, energy, and money on pathways that do not lead to opportunity.
And imagine if you had the roads and bridges, both in Virginia and more nationally, to be able to have those credentials and those skills be recognized. You need the data to be able to make those informed decisions. Jason, turning to you, just how do you envision sort of effective public-private partnerships to bridge into what Amy was just talking about?
Yeah, when I think about that, and I think about the great state of Virginia and, the stewardship you have over those systems and making sure that the dollars you're using are getting the most impact for your state. And now we step back a little bit and take a look at the United States, and we take a look at the labor market that we have. And I'm not sure how many students there are currently in Virginia. 1.3 million. Our labor market's about between 170 and 180 million. That's our student base. That's our learner base. And when we're looking at that and saying in a dynamic economy where working adults are going to need to upskill and reskill routinely and at scale, what is the infrastructure to support that? And this is something Matt and I talk about in some of our other work. There really isn't any. It's absent. So yes, we need to do stuff for youth kind of coming up through the system, but for all of us, what's the infrastructure there to serve it? How are we going to finance it? Who's going to deliver it? We're going to need to build this. And it can't be built through government alone. There aren't enough federal or state tools of action to solve this problem. That is the upskilling challenge of our time. The only way we're going to get through it is public-private partnership. So I think we can maximize our investment. We can leverage more employer contributions. We can create the incentive structure to build a culture of upskilling and reskilling, but it's going to have to be co-designed. So it's the only way through this. And when I look at a learner population of 170 million plus, it's going to take tools like Credentials of Value to provide information that cuts through the noise, because there's not going to be enough kind of public policy signals or even regulation to determine what's good, what's bad, what's the wheat, what's the chaff. It's going to take the ability to kind of go direct to the learners, the consumers, the workers themselves, to give them actionable information where they can go spend their money, or maybe some taxpayer money as well, some subsidies, to get this done. So to me, the only way to solve this is public-private. And if we kind of just function within our own silos, we're not doing the American people a service. We're actually putting them in a place of disadvantage.
Marcus, turning to you, having heard what Jason and Amy just said, you work with a lot of talent leaders from companies large and not as large, and there's a lot of noise. How are you working and supporting your portfolio of companies to be able to understand the credentials of value, understand skills? Tell me a little bit about how your portfolio companies are addressing this.
Yeah, so, for us, as I mentioned before, we kind of see ourselves as consultants, advisors, intermediaries. Once we acquire a company, we want to make sure that we add the most value that we can to that company before it IPOs, before it's sold. And again, through the lens of talent. So we want to make sure that we are the experts in that space to understand what they may need. That might not be able to respond to every single need across our companies. Again, they're so varied, industry, geography, size, what have you. But to be knowledgeable about what's out there. So being parts of these kinds of conversations, I think is really important for us. As I was building career pathways, starting to think about who are the significant voices, the contributors to this space, to understand what is the research that's coming out about what's the, not just latest and greatest, but what is the data showing? How do I then pull that data into the conversations with the portfolio companies to say, hey, here's what's happening in this space more broadly? Because most of them, as you can imagine, are heads down. They have day jobs. They're focusing on just making sure that they have the talent to meet their needs. We're able to help them kind of pull up a little bit from the weeds and say, here's kind of what's going on, both from an external industry perspective and just a general workforce perspective, but also across the Blackstone ecosystem. We ask our companies, they'll probably say, for way too much data on a regular basis, but we want to know what's happening within their companies. What's happening around hiring specifically? So are you hiring right now? Are you pausing your hiring or freezing? Are you having to make tough decisions around reductions in your workforce? Let us collect that information, analyze it, and reflect it back to you to say, hey, here's what we're seeing. Here's some insights. Here's where we think there might be some challenges ahead, but here's where we think there might be some opportunities. And so it's important for us and for me to be in these spaces to be able to hear what are the new tools that are being made available that I can then leverage. I also think about the work that we're doing together with BGI and Walmart. They're around a skills first initiative. And so that convenes several large employers to really think about what are some of the most common jobs. As part of that, what are some of the most the core skills, the specialized skills, things like that. It's now public, so you can see it, skills-first.org. And for that, I'm able to bring that back to our portfolio companies and say, hey, here's an opportunity for you to, if you want to build a skills taxonomy, here's a way that you can do that. I think what you saw earlier will be really helpful too, to start to be able to, again, validate and verify what are some of the best providers out there. What is the data showing in terms of how can that add to productivity? How can that add to retention? How can that add to employee sentiment and engagement? So we see our role as being able to come back to the portfolio companies and kind of hold up not just a mirror to show what's going on internally, but also then just show them, hey, here's what's going on more broadly across the workforce.
As we talk so much about skills and skills-based in these discussions, Jason, we tend to focus on large employers. We lead with many of these initiatives looking at large employers first. Thinking about your network with the chamber, how do these both how does this intersect with the smaller and mid-sized companies? How do they utilize these insights to help better find, access, support talent in new ways?
Yeah, and small to mid-sized companies are the largest job creators, so they definitely need to be part of the discussion. Not everything's about the Fortune 100. So as we're looking across all of America and we're trying to figure out where are the voluntary associations which they congregate, expect value, and look to get more knowledgeable and just be better community participants, One of those places is chambers of commerce. We represent over 1,500 of them at the U.S. Chamber. And by using that network to tap into small business at scale, that provides some powerful intermediaries to help aid them in having a functional conversation about credentials of value. So as they're trying to think about their talent needs first, unpack the credential, make it make sense to them as they're trying to hire someone for an opportunity. But if you want them to engage in more thoughtful workforce planning, meet them where they're at their voluntary associations, have them work in numbers, have that intermediary work on their behalf, and have them actually engage with the education and workforce community to build pathways that incorporate credentials of value. So I think that's a great way to reach a lot of small businesses at once, is work through those preferred intermediaries. And I did want to make another quick point, because so much is reliant on good data, and the BGI team has done yeoman's work in cleaning up data to tell a coherent story that people can parse and make sense of around credentials of value. But it doesn't mean the job's done. And what we need to do to help Matt and his team is improve the data he's relying on to deliver this service. And where are we getting a lot of that data from? I don't mean to say this tool in particular, but just in general in the country for labor market information, is we are overly reliant on unemployment insurance wage record data. There's 53 different collection systems across the country. None of them operate off shared definitions or a data model. So we define everything differently. It's incomplete, it's untimely, and yet we're trying to understand what's actually going out there from this incredibly fragmented system that's built to write checks for unemployment. And if we're able to finally standardize the data that employers are reporting to state and federal governments, while also modernizing how it's shared, that would go a long way in giving folks like Matt and the Burning Glass Institute team really good outcomes data to deliver new services and accurately assess what's going on with these credentials. So there's work to be done here. And why that's important for small to mid-sizes is they're not just users and consumers, they're the ones reporting that data to those systems. So we got to meet them where they're at, not only as users of credentials, but how they're reporting outcomes data that tools like credentials of value are likely going to need going forward to tell a better story and give better, higher quality information. That's a key part of this too. So we need to make it easier for them to share better standardized data. And that's going to take work with states like Virginia and others to figure out how we're going to solve this collective action problem around data.
That's a perfect segue. So for my last question to you, Amy, is just from all the initiatives that you're leading at Virginia, are there insights that you can share that other states might take away from this? And then, since we're coming up on time, just maybe close with something that, like a hopeful note on maybe something that's exciting you about where the credential landscape is headed.
Wow. This is about silo busting, right? I'll pick up on what Jason just talked about. This is about getting everybody out of how they work and starting to think about, it is about building bridges, as you just talked about earlier. And so tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, we are having our new, started a couple months ago, meeting where all of my agencies in the Secretariat of Education, in addition to the Secretary of Labor, are meeting together. So that means Virginia Works, which is our new workforce agency. That agency head will sit down with our state higher education executive officer and the director of SHEV, who will sit down with our chancellor of the two-year community college system, who will sit down with our K-12 state superintendent of instruction. And we are bringing in also our economic development partnerships, new talent manager who's in charge of thinking about talent as an economic development piece. And we have made a commitment to sit down and talk for an hour every 2 weeks about exactly this thing, of sitting down and looking at what the data tells us and how do we ensure that these are credentials of value. So that means that if we're going to give people credit in K-12 and incentivize them to produce them, we better make sure that they actually have value in the labor market. And how are we doing that? We're bringing employers into the conversation. So the Chamber of Commerce is going to be joining these meetings next month and talking to us and saying, how do we make sure that these aren't bridges to nowhere? These are bridges to opening doors to opportunity. And to do that, it's about how do we think about pathways? How do we think about signals? And that's what credentials are. They are signals of value, of what matters. And it's about how do we communicate differently. So one of the pieces that we're doing, if I had the two things that excite me the most, is one, this silo busting, that we're getting people to have the same conversation because we are all touching parts of that pathway. Two is that we are putting a laser focus on outcomes in education and in workforce development and about communicating about that so that opportunity seekers, no matter what their age is, know and have that information at their fingertips and can use it. So I'd encourage you to look at the VOE website, which is extraordinary. It's another take on how do you take labor market information and use it and analyze it. But data is only as good as its quality, about what it is. But also, data doesn't change anything unless people use it. And this is a huge piece of this, of how do we incentivize. I would also encourage people to go look at our outcomes portal on the Chev website and just look for college outcomes. We're going to be using these portals, and most importantly in our silo busting, connecting input measures with outcome measures. And what you'll see on the Chev portal is college outcomes for our 4 years in the community college system. But our goal is that we will put on there all of the credentials that are offered as well, and also the outcomes for private colleges, nonprofit colleges, for-profit schools, training programs, because we want to make sure that there is a single place where Virginians can go to say, where do I go to get the skills, knowledge, and competencies that I know will open doors for me. And that's about opening doors to futures for people. And so nothing excites me more than being able to answer the question that people have, which is, how do I do this? Where do I go? How do I know? And one of the worst things that I've ever heard, and I know that everyone in this room has heard it, is when someone says, had I only known. Mm-hmm. Had I only known I needed to take algebra if I wanted to do this. If I had only known I needed to do this degree in order to open this door. And that's what this conversation is about. It is about making sure that we have equitable access to actionable information that's high quality, that people can use to make the best decision to make their dreams come alive.
So beautifully stated. And I think you have a panel and a room that is inspired and also in complete alignment. Marcus, some final thoughts from you on just, you're now getting shared language, there's outcomes, hopefully there are resources that the companies can start to take action. What are the implications for Blackstone and your portfolio companies?
I mean, I think that, career pathways or this work, and I met with again, my executive sponsor, Joe, earlier this week, and he said, we're going to try it and see. We're going to, this whole thing, I think private equity wasn't known or isn't known for being in this space so deeply and in this way. And so over the past few years, it's been really interesting to see kind of, one, how the companies take to it. You do have Blackstone coming in to say, like, hey, you're going to do this program. But are they going to be willing to do it? Are they going to say, no, thank you, we're good, we know where to get talent, we know how to do our thing. But it's been really great to see the reception that we have in the past few years. And so as we continue to, and I think the secretary is exactly right, the busting of silos is really just inspiring. We have a convening every year of our portfolio companies that are participating, of thought leaders in this space, the talent providers as well, and just seeing everybody in that room together, a couple hundred people, the conversations that are happening, the connections that are being made, really, they go back to their respective corners and again, it's heads down and figuring out how can I do this. And for us, we see it as a way for us to continue to encourage them. How do we make sure that they're really seeing the value in this work, the value in investing in their talent to address business need, to address hiring needs, to address, there's some big scary numbers out there about whether it's college enrollment or about labor shortages or about different things that we want to make sure that our companies are prepared to respond to, and this is the way that we're thinking about doing that. So for us, being a voice and hopefully significant contributor with a portfolio as vast and diverse as ours, that we are those employers that are being pulled into the conversation with governments, with those in the public-private space, to make sure that our companies are showing up just as much to be able to contribute to that as well and learn and take it back to their companies, change their practices, think differently and creatively about how they're doing their work. And in our minds, that just makes for better business outcomes, makes for stronger businesses. So for us, it is squarely and always comes back to the business case for this work.
And last but not least, Jason, I always think of you as building infrastructure and thinking about how we can build a system to scale and reach employers and communities and workers and learners all across the country. What about this kind of moment in time? We're talking about outcomes. We're talking about transparency. We're talking about providing opportunities and pathways for all. What inspires you? Is this a moment where that we've all been waiting for? Is this the step forward?
I am inspired because I think we're at a moment in life where we can functionally operationalize the democratization of learning. And it's always been happening, but we kind of talk about like lifelong learning, life-wide learning. We're going to have the technical infrastructure to document, to recognize, to validate all of those experiences we have in our lives if we want to, and to have those experiences as data that reside in places like a digital wallet or a digital container, your Google Drive, whatever it may be. You'll be able to have possession of your experiences and the learning outcomes associated with them. Now, the scary thing about that is you're going to have a lot more registrars out there, so to speak. I like to joke that employers will be the new registrars, or the new educators, and HR the new registrar. But if we can start validating and documenting all the learning happening on the job, think of that 170 million plus workers every year, documenting those experiences, community service experiences, military experiences, any kind of experience where there's some kind of competency attainment, a learning outcome demonstration, we will have the ability to do that and empower somebody with that information. Now that's going to make Matt and his team's job a lot harder because it's going to create more noise. But the good thing is we're finding the right kind of filters that's able to take significant amounts of data and distill it into information that makes sense to people like us to be able to make some decisions about our future. And I want to make Matt's job harder because I want to flood the system with more data about experience, skills, and learning outcomes. And not just from traditional education, but from our employers. And I think it's a real good problem to have. Because if we get this right and we're able to distill the information from the noise, it's going to provide more opportunity for the American workforce and the American economy. So I'm very optimistic. I don't know how exactly we're going to solve it, but I think we're going to find our way into this problem. And folks like Matt and Stuart and others are going to help us figure out how to best research, understand, and interpret what's going on out there. So I think the infrastructure is coming. It's going to get messier. There's going to be more credentials, more records, more experiences. But I think we have the right folks that have the technical smarts to figure out how to process and analyze and share this data back to us in a way where employers can make decisions, state policymakers can make decisions, Congress can make decisions, and people at the kitchen table can make decisions.
I think that realized opportunity of making all learning count, it really feels like it's becoming tangible. To your point, and just in closing, the work of the Credential Value Index and the Navigator tool that we showed and previewed today is really to serve as a step forward. It's not a step only, and it is not the destination. It is really to show the art of the possible, and that and to move past this notion that non-degree credentials or credentials in general can't be evaluated, and we can't measure the outcomes, and if you can't measure the outcomes, you can't facilitate people being able to utilize those outcomes to make decisions that are right for them. And I feel like today marks a moment where we're moving forward in that, and that we're trying to build the basis for which we have that messy data, for which we can layer on and people can use it both in the very end user space, in the policy lever, in the policy universe for incentives and transparency, by employers as they're building out their talent pathways and pipelines, and in the research community as we're all trying to really layer in how do we better understand and support this talent ecosystem to have all of these different pathways for success. So with that, I'm going to thank my panel, and I think we have maybe two or 3 minutes for questions. Yes? Yeah, sure. Okay. So thank my panel here.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for such a great event and panel. I'm Jake Easter. I'm with the Senate Help Committee. I'm very excited, and also want to commend you, actually, for this entire event, not even really mentioning AI by name, but like that's really refreshing these days. But like you alluded to
Thanks
it.
for doing it.
So yeah. But anyway, zooming out a little bit here, I think we when I hear credential, I think of kind of the end of the assembly line for like getting someone connected to life. But I think it goes much beyond that. It's going to have to go much beyond that. And my question for you is, how can the work that you all are doing in this space sort of apply to mapping skills to education earlier on, or competencies earlier on, to sort of unleash like a broader lattice rather than like what we might have conceived of originally as just like lines in one direction, rays in one direction. I think this is probably particularly aimed at Secretary Gadara, but I would like to hear everyone else too.
I'll be fast so everyone can talk. It's a great question. I see these credentials as being door opening. I know I've used that word a lot, but Governor Youngkin we're opening 15 lab schools for K-12 students across the Commonwealth. And the vast majority of them, these are partnerships between higher education institutions, K-12 businesses, community pieces. The vast majority of these schools are going to issue credentials as part of their piece. And when you read those schools' plans, it's because they want to provide experiences and exposure to skills, knowledge, ideas that are foundational for then building on top of it. And it's about opening doors. So I see it not just as a terminal, right? That we need more welders, and so we're going to upskill 66-year-olds to become welders. It's about, I've never thought about doing this, and showing this piece. And I also just think the world is going to move towards these stackable credentials. I mean, the whole fact that we've got companies that are saying you don't need a 4-year degree, you no longer need a 4-year degree to work in the Commonwealth of Virginia, that the whole place is that we can now talk about skills and competency in different ways. So we are trying to build this in to our K-12 system as a chance to open aperture and to widen the aperture so that our students have a broader sense of what's out there and to experience things and to understand about how you build those pathways, and it doesn't have to be linear and there's only one way to do it.
I would only add that if you think about work-based learning programs, if you think about career and technical education programs, or the credentials that students in high school are earning in dual enrollment, there's very little knowledge about the outcomes of those programs and how they're setting up these students to launch and how they're going to help them launch their careers in different ways, whether it's into the post-secondary system or directly into work. And being able to lattice high-quality programs into the K-12 system, both from a skills but also credential outcome lens, where you can launch folks with industry-recognized, high-quality, in-demand credentials, we believe could be very game-changing.
If I could just respond to that really quick. Lots to add, but I'll pick and choose my battles now. And I'll say we've talked a lot about the person and the learning and credentialing they've consumed. I mentioned before employment outcomes. There's a third piece to this triangle, it's job data. And we have work to do there. Because if we're going to rely on traditional labor market information or proxy data, it's not enough to get to the kind of latticing that you're calling for. And we're going to be doing our part at the U.S. Chamber and its foundation to try to galvanize employers to not just do more job analysis and make it more skills-based, but to use tools to make that data more transparent and accessible. So we're going to be testing out some new tools for how employers could send a primary source signal. These employers have validated these skills for these in-demand jobs, but then enable those education and training partners or credentialing partners to be able to go and map their learning offerings to those employer-validated skill profiles. Again, the technology is going to be here, but we're going to need the political will and folks leaning in order to really produce the data that's necessary to do that kind of work. So again, there's work to be done as we're getting better about being more transparent about the credential and learning opportunity and what somebody has, and we're getting better insight into what's actually going on in terms of employment outcomes. There's still work to be done in terms of creating better, more actionable primary source data about skills and jobs. So we're all going to have to work together on that. And it's all going to have to come together to deliver the best product possible to the American workforce. So we're we have some ideas, but it's going to take a lot of testing, and we're going to need everyone's help and support to get it done.
I just want to say two things, two like practical things that we do with our companies. One is help them think about what are the pathways within your organization. I think some of them will say, yeah, of course you can come in and move up and do this and do that. But like, no, how do your employees know that they can come in and move around and do that? Like, how's that laid out for them? How's that spelled out? So encourage them and work with them to really map that out. But then two, we bring together our portfolio companies and our talent provider network, so they can hear each other about what are you focusing on, what are you doing, what are the skills, what are the credentials that your learners are earning, and then how does that apply to the roles that you have open at the company. So very intentionally, we're making sure that we're connecting those two communities that are often siloed to at least be in the same book, if not the same page, to know kind of what are the skills and match to the jobs that they have at the companies.
I think that was a perfect question for us to land and end on. I want to thank everyone for coming today. I want to thank the panel. We're releasing our research report and the Credential Value Index Navigator tool and new website on June 16th. And we welcome everyone to partner and to take a look and provide feedback. We're really in the silo busting business, as you so eloquently said earlier, and just really eager to have this work come to light and to see all of the meaningful impact that it could have. So thank you so much.